taken communion for many, many years, hundreds of times in my life as a Christian. In many cases, the service ended with, and they sang a hymn and went out. And we sang, "Blessed be the tie that binds our hearts in Christian love," and we went out. We went out to lunch, or we went home for lunch. But that's not what the Gospels say happened. They say Jesus and the disciples went out to the Mount of Olives. And then there was Jesus' agonizing prayer in the Garden of Gethsemane. "Father, if it's possible, can this cup be lifted from me? But not my will, but yours be done." And then the arrest and a mock trial and the hitting and the spitting and desertion by all the disciples, not to mention a painful, cruel crucifixion and death. It was not just they went out and all of a sudden it was Easter. It may not have been very long chronologically, but it was a very long time for Jesus. The Bible readings attached to this post describe in detail the events I just outlined. Take your time in reading through them today. We dare not let the glory of Easter erase in our minds the glory of the cross. In 2 or 3 pages of our Bibles, Jesus suffered the greatest humiliation and pain and suffering, and he deserved none of it. We cannot even imagine what he went through, but we must try. T.W. Hunt wrote a book called The Mind of Christ. In it, he talks about the horror of the crucifixion from a medical standpoint. It's tough reading, but it gave me a new appreciation for Jesus' suffering and death. Dr. Hunt says, "They flung him into the dirt, pebbles and grime of the hillside, and stretched his arms onto the crossbar. The spikes were square in shape and about 5.5 inches long. The nailing caused the thumb and fingers to be drawn and cramped sharply inward. The victim had to use the spikes in his feet as a kind of step to force his body upward so he could breathe. Jesus had to endure hours of twisting, joint-rending cramps, partial intermittent asphyxiation, and the fiery sting in his back as he struggled and lunged up and down the pole. Just before he died, Jesus' heart was struggling to pump the small amount of blood left in his torn and lacerated system. With this came a deep, crushing pain in the chest cavity. The squeezed heart now was laboring to pump heavy, thick, sluggish blood through the maimed and sorely abused body. And if that weren't enough, they came now to break his legs. The Jews had strict laws about leaving a body hanging on a tree overnight, and this one was compounded by the fact that it was the eve of the Sabbath and Passover. But when they came to Jesus, he was already dead, so it was not necessary to break his legs. What did they do? One of them thrust his spear into Jesus' side. Was that really to make sure he was dead, or just another act of horror and cruelty? Painful food for thought words. Then there's William Barclay's description of this event. It may well be true that Jesus literally died of a broken heart. Normally, the body of a dead person will not bleed. Perhaps Jesus' experience was so horrible that his heart ruptured. When that happened, the blood of the heart spilled out into the fluid in the surrounding areas. The soldier's spear pierced that area, and the mingled fluid and blood came forth. Let that sink in for a minute. Jesus died of a broken heart. As we move through Good Friday and Black Saturday, let us move slowly and deliberately and prayerfully. We remember Jesus shed blood and broken body last night with the Maundy Thursday communion service. Let us continue to remember that Maundy comes from that word for commandment. A new commandment I give you, that you love one another as I have loved you. Now will you pray silent prayers about the death of Jesus on Good Friday? Let us pray.